A dead silence stretched across the line. It was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment I thought the call had dropped. I could hear the faint, distant sound of traffic outside my window, the gentle hum of my refrigerator. But from his end, there was nothing. Then I heard it. A shriek of pure, animal rage tore through the phone, followed by gut-wrenching sobs that sounded torn from the deepest part of her soul. My blood ran cold, a sudden, icy shock that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. He had me on speaker. He hadn't warned me. He had simply held the phone out, letting my private, gently spoken words fly across the air and strike his sister like a physical blow. Her hatred was a familiar storm, a constant pressure I had learned to live with. But his silence, his deliberate, calculated betrayal, that was the blow that shattered everything. My name is Kennedy, and for 12 years I thought I was living a love story. I built my entire world around the man I married, a man I believed was the kindest soul I had ever met. I saw a gentleness in him that his own family seemed determined to crush. His mother was a woman carved from ice, her approval always just out of reach. His sister was a storm of jealousy and greed, a person who seemed to find her only joy in the misery of others. They bullied him, belittled his choices, and treated him like a child whose primary purpose was to fund their lives. I saw my role as his shield. I would be the one to absorb the blows, to deflect the poison, to create a safe harbor where the man I loved could finally be himself. I truly believed that our love was the prize, the thing worth fighting for, and that one day it would be enough to overcome the darkness his family cast over us. From the very first day he introduced me, his sister decided who I was. She took one look at me and spat the word gold digger. It was a ridiculous, baseless accusation. It was also a label that would follow me for the next 12 years, a constant whisper in the background of our lives. The lie persisted even after I built a successful career of my own, my income eventually matching and then surpassing his. But facts never mattered to her. The truth was an inconvenience. In her mind, I was a thief, stealing the brother whose finances she had come to see as her own personal inheritance. I endured it all with a patience I didn't know I possessed. I sat through holidays where her insults were served up alongside the turkey. I smiled through family gatherings where my mother-in-law would look straight through me as if I were a ghost at the table. I did it because I loved him. My love was my fatal flaw. I had this unwavering faith in his inner strength. I truly believed that his love for me would eventually become stronger than his fear of his family. I saw his quiet apologies after every ugly incident as proof that he was on my side, that we were a team. But he was fundamentally weak, a man-child locked in a desperate, unending quest for his mother's and sister's approval. His primary motivation was not our happiness, but the avoidance of conflict with them. He would do anything, say anything, to keep the peace in their world, even if it meant shattering the peace in ours. Over the years, I stopped trying to fix this weakness in him. I simply accepted it as a part of the man I had chosen to marry. I told myself that his spinelessness around them didn't diminish his love for me. I was wrong. It was the defining feature of his character, and it would be our undoing. That final phone call was the culmination of a dozen years of small betrayals. His sister's husband had finally left her, and my husband had gone to comfort her. He called me from her house, his voice low and tired. He told me how devastated she was. Trying to be supportive, trying to find a silver lining for a woman I knew was deeply unhappy, I made the mistake of speaking the truth. "I have never seen those two happy," I said, my voice gentle. "Maybe, in time, she will see this is for the best." It was a quiet observation, meant only for my husband's ears, a thought shared in the privacy and trust of a marriage. But he didn't see it that way. He saw it as an opportunity, an offering he could serve up to his grieving sister to prove his loyalty to her. In that dead silence before her scream, I understood everything. He wasn't my shield, he was their weapon. He had used my trust, my love, and my voice to hurt me and appease her in a single, gutless act. He had thrown me to the wolves, and he hadn't even flinched. Her screams and sobs continued to echo through the phone, a soundtrack to the death of my marriage. I didn't hang up. I just stood there, listening to the raw, unfiltered hatred she had for me and the deafening silence of the man who was supposed to be my partner. I finally pressed the red icon on my screen, ending the call and the life I thought I had. The quiet of my home rushed back in, but it was different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was empty. The foundation of my world had been pulverized into dust. For a long time, I just stood in my kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand. The patient, deeply loving woman I had been for over a decade died in that moment. The part of me that always saw the best in him, that made excuses for him, that shielded him, was gone. In her place, something cold and meticulously clear began to form. The grief was still there, a vast, black ocean inside me. But beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. It was not anger. It was resolve. I had spent 12 years on defense. It was time to play offense. I had spent 12 years on defense. It was time to play offense. But my first move was to do nothing at all. I simply waited, moving through our home with a newfound quiet that matched his own. The house, once our sanctuary, became a cold, silent battlefield. The weeks that followed were suffocating. He existed in the same space as me, but not with me. He would sit in the living room, staring at the television without seeing it, his phone glowing in his lap. I knew who he was talking to. I could almost feel his sister's venom seeping through the screen, a constant drip of poison into his ear. He was punishing me with his silence, letting my supposed crime hang in the air between us, unsaid and undefined. He wanted me to break, to beg, to ask what was wrong. But the woman who would have done that was gone. I simply went about my days, my work a welcome distraction, my meticulous nature now focused on my own survival. I made my own meals. I slept soundly on my side of the bed, no longer reaching for a man who had become a stranger. The love I once had for him had been a warm, living thing. Now, all I felt was a clinical curiosity. I was an observer in my own life, waiting for the final act of his betrayal to play out. It came on a Tuesday night. I was reading on the couch, and he was across the room, pretending to watch a game. The air was thick with unspoken words. Finally, he turned the television off, plunging the room into a heavy silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. He wouldn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "She told me why her husband left," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It was the first full sentence he had spoken to me in almost 3 weeks. I didn't respond. I just lowered my book and waited. I knew this was it. This was the lie his sister had spent weeks crafting, the masterstroke she believed would finally end our marriage and bring her brother, and his wallet, firmly back under her control. "He left her for you," he said, the words coming out in a rush, as if he couldn't bear the taste of them. "She said you two have been having an affair, that you're the reason her family is destroyed." The accusation was so absurd, so completely detached from reality, that my first impulse was to laugh. My brother-in-law was a decent man, but there was absolutely nothing between us beyond a polite, familial distance. The lie was a pure product of his sister's twisted, jealous mind. But I didn't laugh. I met his gaze, forcing him to finally look at me. I saw no conviction in his eyes, only a hollowed-out exhaustion. He was a puppet, and his sister was holding the strings. He was simply reciting the lines she had fed him. "All right," I said, my voice perfectly even. I stood up, walked to the small table where my purse was, and took out my phone. I went back to the coffee table and placed it in front of him. Then I went to my study and returned with my tablet and my laptop. I placed them all neatly in a row. "Here," I said, my tone as calm as if I were discussing a grocery list. "Here is every device I own. Here are all the passwords. My email, my text messages, my call history, my social media. It's all there. Look through every single bit of it. Find your proof." For a moment, a flicker of something, maybe the man I used to love, appeared in his eyes. He looked at the devices, then at my face. He saw no fear, no guilt, no panic. He saw only a woman who was offering him the unvarnished truth. He picked up my phone. I sat back down on the couch and waited. I listened to the sound of his thumbs swiping across the screen, the quiet taps as he opened and closed applications. He went through everything, his shoulders hunched in concentration. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself a sliver of hope. He would see the truth. He would see how insane she was. He spent nearly an hour digging through my entire digital life. When he was done, he placed the phone back on the table with a soft click. He had found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not a single misplaced word or suspicious message. He had found 12 years of a faithful marriage. He finally looked at me, and I saw the choice being made in real time. It was a battle between a decade of reality with me and a lifetime of toxic loyalty to her. The battle was over in seconds. "She wouldn't lie about something like this," he whispered, his voice cracking. The weakness in that statement was absolute. He chose her fantasy. He chose the poison because it was easier than standing up to the person who was feeding it to him. In that instant, watching him discard our entire history for a lie so transparent it was laughable, something inside me didn't break. It solidified. The frantic, desperate hurt I had been suppressing vanished, replaced by a chilling, diamond-hard calm. The last embers of my love for him were extinguished. I looked at the man on the other side of the room and saw a complete stranger. A weak, pathetic stranger I no longer recognized and certainly no longer loved. I didn't feel the urge to scream or cry. I felt nothing but a profound and sudden sense of freedom. I stood up. "I see," I said, my voice clear and steady. I took my own advice, the words I had spoken into the phone just weeks ago. This marriage wasn't a tragedy to be mourned. It was a sickness, and I was finally being granted the cure. The decision to let it all burn was made not in a blaze of anger, but in absolute, quiet clarity. They had handed me the weapon themselves. They had written a story about my affair with my brother-in-law. It was a clumsy, hateful piece of fiction designed to paint me as the villain. I decided, in that moment, that I would give their story the ending it deserved. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I almost didn't recognize. It was him, my ex-brother-in-law. His message was a torrent of guilt and apologies, explaining how his ex-wife's obsession had destroyed not one marriage, but two. He was consumed with shame over the lie she had told about us. As I read his words, I didn't feel anger or pity. I saw the path forward, laid out before me with perfect, poetic precision. My revenge wouldn't be some elaborate, messy scheme. It would be simple. It would be elegant. I would use my greatest strength, the very thing my sister-in-law resented me for. My ability to build a genuine, supportive connection with another person. I would take this man, broken by the same woman who had tried to break me, and I would build a real relationship with him, founded on the shared trauma of her madness. The plan was simple. I would turn their fiction into my reality. I would live the lie they invented, and in doing so, I would find my own truth, my own happiness, and my own justice. I typed out my reply, my fingers steady. "It's not your fault," I wrote, "but we should talk." "It's not your fault," I wrote, "but we should talk." That simple message opened a door. The execution of my new life wasn't a single, dramatic event. It was a slow, deliberate reconstruction, built piece by piece from the rubble of my marriage. It began with texts, then graduated to long phone calls that stretched late into the night. His name was David, and he was a kind, gentle man who had spent years walking on eggshells, trying to navigate the minefield of his wife's moods. He, too, had been suffocated by her toxicity. Our conversations were a revelation. We found a strange and powerful solace in each other's company, two survivors of the same storm. We talked about everything and nothing. We shared stories of her irrational jealousy, the way she could twist any kindness into an insult, any success into a threat. For the first time, I wasn't just being told I was crazy for feeling what I felt. I was being understood. He had lived it, too. But we didn't just talk about her. We talked about our jobs, our dreams for the future, the quiet hobbies that had been our only escape. I learned he was a talented woodworker, and he learned about my passion for landscape photography. We were building something new, a friendship founded on the wreckage of our old lives. I had moved out of the house I shared with my husband. The legal proceedings were underway, a slow grind of paperwork that felt completely detached from the emotional reality. My new apartment was small, but it was mine. It was a clean slate, a space free from the ghosts of betrayal and years of quiet unhappiness. One evening, a couple of months ago, David came over. I had made dinner, and we sat at my small kitchen table, sharing a bottle of wine. The conversation was easy, flowing without effort. The understanding between us was so profound it barely needed words. We were two people who had been profoundly wronged by the same person, and in that shared experience, we had found a rare and genuine peace. There was no grand seduction. There was no calculated move. As the evening wound down, we were sitting on the couch, the city lights twinkling outside my window. A comfortable silence settled between us, and in that quiet, a decision was made. He reached out and gently touched my hand. I turned my hand over and laced my fingers with his. It was the most natural thing in the world. Later that night, as we lay together in the quiet of my bedroom, the immense weight of the injustice I had been carrying for so long simply lifted. It evaporated into the air, leaving behind a feeling of profound release. The false accusation had been a heavy, suffocating cloak I was forced to wear. Now it felt like a suit of armor I had forged myself. I had taken their ugliest, most hateful lie and transformed it into my own intimate, powerful, and deeply vindicating truth. I had not destroyed anything. I had built something real and honest from the ashes of their deceit. I fell asleep that night feeling not vengeful, but whole. Last week, my soon-to-be ex-husband asked to meet. He wanted to talk about the final details of the divorce settlement. I agreed, suggesting a small, neutral coffee shop halfway between my new apartment and our old house. I arrived first, choosing a small table in the corner. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The confident man I had married was gone. In his place was a tired, defeated stranger. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped, as if he were carrying an invisible, crushing weight. He looked broken. He sat down and stumbled through a few minutes of awkward small talk before he finally got to the real reason he had asked me there. He told me he had finally seen it. He had finally understood. The lies his sister told had become so wild, so contradictory, that even he could no longer deny the truth. "She's crazy, Kennedy," he said, his voice a low, desperate whisper. "The things she says, they don't even make sense anymore. She's pushed everyone away. It's just me and her now, and she is miserable." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I believe you. I know you never did anything. I was a fool." He reached across the table, trying to take my hand, but I gently moved it to my lap. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. "Let's postpone the divorce," he said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "We can try therapy. We can fix this. I know we can. I made a terrible mistake." He was trying to rewind time, to undo the choice he had made. He was pleading for a do-over from a woman who had already moved on to an entirely new game. I let him finish his entire speech, my expression calm and unreadable. The frantic, heartbroken woman he had betrayed was gone. I sat there in complete control, and I felt the power in the room shift entirely to me. He was the one who was powerless now, the one drowning in the consequences of his own cowardice. He had expected tears or anger or a bitter fight. He had no idea how to handle my quiet composure. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to confess to my new reality or throw his weakness in his face. The most powerful thing I could do was let his own actions speak for themselves. I just looked at him, the man who calmly and deliberately let his sister destroy our life together, and I spoke two simple words. "It is too late." I said it softly, without anger or malice. It was not an insult. It was a statement of fact. A door had been closed, locked, and the key had been thrown away. I watched the last flicker of hope die in his eyes. It was a visible thing, like a candle being snuffed out in a dark room. In that moment, he finally understood. He understood that his choice was permanent. His betrayal was not a chapter he could ask me to forget. It was the end of the book. He had to live with the consequences of his weakness, and I was no longer one of them. I stood up, left enough cash on the table to cover my coffee, and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, leaving him alone with the ruins he had created. I stood up, left enough cash on the table to cover my coffee, and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, leaving him alone with the ruins he had created. The warmth on my skin felt different, cleaner. It wasn't just the end of a conversation. It was the end of a 12-year-long winter I hadn't even realized I was living in. That sunlight felt like a promise, a quiet vow that things could be different. It was a promise that the next year not only kept, but exceeded in ways I could never have imagined. 1 year later, my life is unrecognizable in the best possible way. The small, sterile apartment I first escaped to has been replaced by a home. It's a place filled with light, the scent of sawdust from David's workshop in the garage, and the quiet, contented presence of a man who values truth as much as I do. Our relationship, born from the ashes of our former lives, has blossomed into something genuine and beautiful. There are no games, no hidden agendas. It is built on a foundation of absolute mutual respect and an understanding forged in a shared fire. We survived the same storm, and we know the value of a safe harbor. Sometimes I'll be in my studio, editing photographs, and he'll come in and just quietly watch, his presence a comforting warmth at my back. Other times, I'll find him in his workshop, turning a rough piece of wood into something elegant and functional, and I'll feel a sense of peace so profound it almost brings me to tears. We are happy. It's a quiet happiness, a sturdy and reliable thing, not a fragile performance for others. I don't seek out news of my old life, but sometimes it finds me. A few weeks ago, I ran into a former colleague of my ex-husband's at the grocery store. She was kind, if a little awkward, her eyes full of a pity I no longer needed. After the usual pleasantries, she hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I hear things, she said, about your ex." She told me that he is utterly alone. He sold our old house because the silence was too much for him. He rattles around a new, empty condo, a ghost haunted by the marriage he so casually threw away. He doesn't go out. He has pushed away most of his friends who grew tired of his endless, circular misery. And his sister, she got exactly what she wanted. She got me out of the picture. She has her brother and his income all to herself, but her victory was a poisoned chalice. It cost her everything that truly mattered. The colleague told me that my ex-husband now resents his sister with a quiet, simmering bitterness. He sees her for what she is. He is trapped by a lifetime of obligation, still funding her life, but the relationship is a fractured, ugly thing. He blames her for the destruction she caused, for the craziness he can no longer ignore. They are trapped together in the toxic world they cultivated. He is her warden and she is his prisoner, both locked in a cage of their own making. She has his financial support, but she lost his love and respect forever. He is free of me, but he is shackled to her, the architect of his own ruin. Hearing this didn't bring me a surge of triumphant joy. It brought a quiet, somber sense of balance. It was like watching the final, logical conclusion to a story that had been written long ago. His weakness and her greed were always going to lead them to this exact place. It was inevitable. I finished my shopping, wished the colleague well, and walked out to my car. As I drove home, I thought about the sheer poetic irony of it all. They handed me a weapon, a lie so ugly and sharp they were sure it would be my ruin. They accused me of having a secret life, a hidden love. I simply took their script and made it real. I took the cornerstone of their lie and used it to build a new life, a peaceful life. A life filled with the genuine connection they tried to tell me I was stealing. My world is solid, built with care and honesty. Theirs is nothing but dust and echoes. They are left with the rubble.